Rebecca had always been good at sizing people up. At least that's what she told herself. After 12 years at Westfield Marketing Group, she'd earned her corner office on the 14th floor, and she wore her success like armor. Designer heels clicked against marble floors as she walked through the office each morning, her perfectly styled hair and tailored suits announcing her status before she even spoke. She'd learned early in her career that perception was everything. The right clothes, the right connections, the right attitude, these things separated the winners from the losers. And Rebecca considered herself very much a winner. That's why she barely registered Daniel when he showed up on a Monday morning in September. He was introduced during the weekly team meeting as the new analyst joining their department. Rebecca glanced up from her phone long enough to take in the basics. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair that looked like he'd cut it himself. A gray suit that had probably looked decent 5 years ago but now seemed a size too loose, like he'd either lost weight or bought it secondhand. His shoes, she always noticed shoes were scuffed at the toes, polished but clearly old. Daniel will be supporting our consumer research initiatives, their department had announced with forced enthusiasm. He comes to us with some interesting experience, and I'm sure you'll all make him feel welcome. Rebecca offered a tight smile and returned to her phone. She had real work to do, a presentation for their biggest client that afternoon. New hires came and went. Most of them didn't last a year, especially the ones who showed up looking like they couldn't afford a proper wardrobe. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca's initial assessment seemed to confirm itself. Daniel was quiet during meetings, rarely speaking unless directly asked a question. When he did contribute, his ideas were safe, unremarkable. He ate lunch at his desk. She'd seen the same battered lunch bag sitting there day after day, the kind of thing you'd pack for a child's school trip. While other team members went out for expensive sushi or trendy salads, Daniel apparently brought leftovers from home. Probably has a family to support, Rebecca mentioned to her colleague Jasmine one afternoon as they waited for their lattes at the corner cafe. You can always tell the ones who are just here for the paycheck. No ambition, no drive, just punching a clock. Jasmine shrugged. He seems nice enough. Asked me some pretty smart questions about the Rodriguez campaign yesterday. Rebecca waved this away. Nice doesn't close deals. Nice doesn't impress clients. What really confirmed Rebecca's opinion was Daniel's complete absence from the social fabric of the office. When the team went out for happy hour on Fridays, Daniel politely declined. When they planned the company softball team, he didn't sign up. The holiday party planning committee, he wasn't interested. To Rebecca, this was proof positive that he wasn't serious about his career. Everyone knew that half the game was played, outside the office, in the bars and restaurants where real relationships were built. She began treating him accordingly. When assigning projects, Daniel got the grunt work, data entry, basic research tasks that required more time than thought. She never invited him to the client meetings, never copied him on the important email chains where strategy was discussed. When he submitted reports, she barely glanced at them before passing them down to someone else for review. Daniel never complained. That bothered her more than she wanted to admit. He just nodded when she handed him another tedious assignment, said, "I'll get that done for you," and went back to his desk. He was always polite, always professional, even when she was curt with him. Even when she talked over him in meetings or dismissed his suggestions with a quick, "That's not quite what we're looking for." Sometimes she'd catch him staying late, his desk lamp the only light left on in their section of the floor. She'd walk past in her gym clothes, heading home after her evening Pilates class, and there he'd be, hunched over his computer, working on some report she'd assigned him that afternoon. No complaints about the deadline, no requests for help. Just steady, quiet work. It should have made her respect him at least a little. Instead, it reinforced everything she believed. He was exactly what she thought he was, someone without options, someone without the intelligence or charisma to demand better treatment. He stayed late because he was slow, probably. He didn't socialize because he didn't know how. He dressed poorly because he didn't understand that image mattered. Rebecca had built her career on reading people correctly, and Daniel was an open book. One Tuesday afternoon, there was a crisis. Their presentation software crashed 3 hours before their biggest pitch of the quarter. The entire team panicked as their IT department struggled to recover the files. Rebecca felt her carefully controlled world tilting. This presentation had taken weeks to prepare. Losing it would be catastrophic. While everyone else stood around the conference room in various states of stress, Daniel quietly asked if he could see the shared drive folder. Rebecca barely heard him at first. "What?" "The shared folder where the research files are stored. I might be able to help." Rebecca almost laughed. What could he possibly do that their IT professionals couldn't? But with 2 hours left and nothing to lose, she gave him access. Daniel worked without speaking, his fingers moving across the keyboard with surprising speed. Within 40 minutes, he'd reconstructed the entire presentation from the raw research files. But it wasn't just a copy of what they'd lost. Somehow, he'd made it better. The data was cleaner, the visuals more compelling, the flow more logical. The presentation won them a $2 million contract. Rebecca thanked him publicly in the meeting that followed, because that's what you were supposed to do. But privately, she chalked it up to luck. Maybe he'd seen the original presentation before it crashed. Maybe he'd just gotten lucky with the layout. It didn't change what she saw when she looked at him. Someone temporary, someone ordinary, someone who would eventually wash out and be replaced by someone more impressive. She was good at reading people, after all. She'd been doing it successfully for 12 years. There was no reason to doubt her instincts now. The presentation incident should have been a wake-up call. But Rebecca had spent too many years trusting her instincts to let one moment shake her confidence. She filed it away as an anomaly and went back to treating Daniel exactly as she had before. But then the small things started adding up. It began with languages. Rebecca was in the break room one Thursday afternoon, waiting for her green tea to steep when she heard Daniel on his phone near the window. He was speaking in what sounded like perfect Mandarin Chinese, not the halting textbook kind she'd learned in her one semester of language classes, but fluid and natural, laughing at something the person on the other end said. Rebecca stood there with her tea bag suspended in midair, listening. When he hung up, his phone immediately rang again. This time he switched to what she was pretty sure was Spanish, though it sounded different from the Spanish she'd heard before. More formal, maybe European. He noticed her staring and gave a small, apologetic smile. "Sorry, just coordinating some things back home. Family stuff." "You speak Chinese?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "My mother's family is from Taiwan, and my father worked in Madrid for years, so..." He shrugged like it was nothing, like being fluent in 3 languages was as ordinary as knowing how to use Excel. Rebecca left the break room feeling unsettled. It was a small thing, just languages. Plenty of people grew up bilingual. It didn't mean anything about his professional capabilities. She pushed the moment aside. But then there was the thing with the CEO. Westfield held their annual company picnic in late October, one of those mandatory fun events that Rebecca normally enjoyed, because it gave her face time with upper management. She spent the first hour working the crowd, making sure to be seen by all the right people. That's when she noticed Daniel. He was over by the volleyball courts, but he wasn't playing. He was talking with James Westfield himself, the founder and CEO of the entire company. And they weren't having some brief, polite exchange. They were deep in conversation, James laughing hard at something Daniel said, clapping him on the shoulder like they were old friends. Rebecca watched from a distance, her plate of potato salad forgotten in her hand. The conversation went on for nearly 20 minutes. At one point, James called his wife over to join them, and the 3 of them talked like they were at a dinner party, not a corporate picnic. "How does he know the CEO?" Rebecca asked Jasmine, trying to keep her voice casual. Jasmine looked over. "Who, Daniel? No idea. Maybe they met during his interview process." But that didn't make sense. Junior analysts didn't interview with the CEO. They barely spoke to their department heads. Rebecca had worked at Westfield for over a decade and could count on one hand the number of real conversations she'd had with James Westfield. The following week, Rebecca's assistant mentioned something in passing while dropping off files. "I was processing Daniel's onboarding paperwork. Some insurance thing got delayed, and I noticed he has an MBA from some university in Switzerland. One of those fancy international business schools." Rebecca looked up from her computer. "Switzerland?" Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Those programs are super competitive. My cousin tried to get into one and didn't even make it. Passed the first round of applications. After her assistant left, Rebecca sat motionless at her desk. An international MBA, fluent in at least 3 languages, on a first-name basis with the CEO. These weren't the credentials of someone just scraping by, someone without options or ambition. She opened her laptop and did something she should have done months ago. She searched for Daniel's name on LinkedIn. His profile was sparse, almost deliberately minimal. It listed his current position at Westfield and his MBA, but the years before that were vague. International business consultant in Singapore, strategic advisor for a company she'd never heard of. Nothing concrete, nothing detailed. It was the profile of someone who didn't want to be found, or someone who didn't need to advertise. Rebecca closed her laptop, her mouth dry. A small voice in the back of her mind whispered that she'd made a mistake. But she pushed it down. So he had some education and some mysterious past work experience. That didn't change the fact that he dressed like he shopped at discount stores. It didn't change his beat-up lunch bag or his refusal to network properly. It didn't change that he was, for whatever reason, working as a junior analyst instead of leveraging whatever credentials he supposedly had. Maybe he'd failed in those previous jobs. Maybe the international experience hadn't worked out, and this was his second chance. Maybe the CEO was just being polite at the picnic and she was reading too much into it. Rebecca was good at reading people. She'd been doing it her whole career. One conversation with the CEO and an expensive degree didn't change the full picture she'd assembled over months of observation. But the doubt had taken root, growing quietly in the back of her mind. She started paying more attention despite herself. She noticed that when Daniel did speak in meetings, people listened. Not everyone, but the senior partners who visited from other offices seemed to lean forward, seemed interested in his perspective. She noticed that the reports he turned in, the ones she'd been barely glancing at, were always early, always thorough, with insights she hadn't expected. She noticed that he never talked about himself. When people asked about his background, he deflected with questions about them. When someone mentioned his languages, he changed the subject. It was like he was deliberately staying under the radar, deliberately avoiding attention. Why would someone do that? What kind of person intentionally made themselves invisible? The question bothered Rebecca more than she wanted to admit. She'd built her career on being seen, on making sure everyone knew her accomplishments and capabilities. The idea of someone choosing obscurity was foreign to her, almost suspicious. One evening in November, she stayed late to finish a budget report. The office was dark except for her desk lamp and one other light across the floor. Daniel's desk. She watched him work for a while, his concentration absolute, his worn suit jacket draped over his chair. He looked up suddenly, catching her staring. Their eyes met across the empty office. He gave her that same small, polite smile he always did. No resentment, no frustration at how she'd treated him. Just a simple acknowledgement of another person working late. Rebecca looked away first, her cheeks burning with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It felt uncomfortably close to shame. She gathered her things and left without saying goodnight, the silence of the empty office following her all the way to her car. The doubt was no longer a whisper. It was getting harder to ignore, harder to explain away. Something wasn't adding up. And for the first time in her career, Rebecca wasn't sure she'd read the situation correctly at all. The email came on a Friday afternoon in early December. Subject line: mandatory all-staff meeting, Monday 9 a.m. No explanation, no context. Just a calendar invitation that couldn't be declined. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. In 12 years at Westfield, she'd never seen a mandatory all-staff meeting called with only one weekend's notice. The office buzzed with speculation. Layoffs, some people whispered. A merger, others guessed. Maybe the company was being sold. By Monday morning, the anxiety was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rebecca arrived early, claiming a seat in the main conference room where she could be seen by the executives. She'd worn her best navy suit, the one that screamed competence and leadership. Whatever was coming, she wanted to be visible, wanted to remind the decision-makers of her value. People filed in slowly, filling every seat and lining up against the walls. The energy was strange, nervous. Rebecca saw department heads she rarely encountered. People from accounting and legal and operations all crowded into the same space. And then she saw Daniel. He was already there. But he wasn't standing against the wall with the other junior staff. He wasn't even sitting in the middle rows where the mid-level managers had gathered. He was at the conference table itself, in one of the leather chairs normally reserved for senior leadership. Rebecca felt a flash of irritation. What was he doing? This wasn't the time for junior analysts to overstep. Someone should tell him to move before the executives arrived and the door opened. James Westfield walked in, followed by the entire board of directors. Rebecca had only seen some of these people in photographs. They were the kind of powerful that didn't visit regional offices, the kind that existed in corner offices in Manhattan and London. James moved to the head of the table, but he didn't sit in his usual chair. Instead, he stood behind it, his hands resting on the back. He looked tired, older than Rebecca had ever seen him. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," James began, his voice steady but heavy. "I'm going to be direct because you all deserve that. For the past 6 months, I've been dealing with some health issues. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough that my doctors and my family have made it clear I can't continue at the pace I've been keeping." A murmur rippled through the room. Rebecca's mind raced. If James was stepping down, the VP of operations would probably take over. That would mean reorganizations, maybe opportunities for advancement if she played it right. "Effective today, I'm stepping down as CEO," James continued. "I'll remain on the board, but the day-to-day operations will be handed over to someone many of you don't know very well yet." James turned and gestured toward the table, toward Daniel. "Most of you know Daniel Chen as a recent addition to our marketing department. What you don't know is that Daniel is the son of our majority shareholder, Helen Chen, and he's been conducting an operational assessment of Westfield for the past 6 months." The room went completely silent. Rebecca felt like the floor had dropped out from under her chair. She stared at Daniel, who sat calmly with his hands folded on the table, the same quiet expression he always wore. Daniel spent 15 years building one of the most successful consulting firms in Southeast Asia before selling it 3 years ago, James continued. He holds degrees in business and organizational psychology from some of the best institutions in the world. When his mother, who has been our largest investor for 20 years, wanted to ensure the company's future, Daniel agreed to come here and evaluate our operations from the ground up, not from an executive suite, but from the inside where the real work happens. Rebecca's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to process what she was hearing. The worn suit, the packed lunches, the quiet demeanor. It had all been intentional. He'd been watching them, evaluating them, while they'd treated him like he was nothing, while she'd treated him like he was nothing. James stepped aside, and Daniel stood. He looked exactly the same as he always did. Same simple suit, same calm expression. But now, standing at the head of the table, he seemed different. Not because he'd changed, but because Rebecca was finally seeing him clearly. "I want to start by thanking all of you for your work," Daniel said, his voice quiet but carrying easily through the silent room. "These past 6 months have been eye-opening. I've seen incredible dedication, creativity, and talent at every level of this organization." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, not anger, but something sadder. "I've also seen some troubling patterns, cultural issues that have been allowed to take root, environments where talented people are overlooked because they don't fit someone's idea of what success should look like, where hierarchies are maintained through exclusion rather than merit, where networking and image are valued more than actual results." Rebecca felt his eyes sweep across the room, but they didn't linger on her. Somehow that made it worse. She wasn't even important enough to single out. "Starting today, we're going to make some changes," Daniel continued. "I've spent the past month working with the board on a restructuring plan. We're going to build a culture where people are judged by their contributions, their character, and their willingness to grow, not by how expensive their clothes are or who they have lunch with." He pulled out a tablet and began outlining the changes. New leadership positions were being created, some filled by people Rebecca had never considered important. The receptionist who'd worked there for 15 years was being promoted to office operations manager because she'd apparently submitted a detailed proposal for improving workflow efficiency. One of the guys from the warehouse was being brought into logistics planning because of innovations he'd implemented that saved the company thousands. People Rebecca had walked past for years without really seeing them were suddenly being recognized. Elevated given opportunities. I'm not here to punish anyone, Daniel said, and for a moment his eyes did meet Rebecca's. I'm here to build something better. Everyone in this room will have the chance to be part of that. But it will require some of you to think differently about what leadership means and how we treat the people around us. The meeting continued for another hour, but Rebecca barely heard the rest. Her mind was spinning, replaying every interaction she'd had with Daniel over the past 6 months. Every dismissive comment, every menial task she'd assigned him, every time she'd talked over him in meetings or excluded him from important discussions. He'd been evaluating her the entire time. And she'd failed the test spectacularly. When the meeting finally ended, people filed out in stunned silence. Rebecca sat frozen in her chair, watching Daniel shake hands with the board members, watching them treat him with the respect she'd never considered giving him. She'd been so sure she was good at reading people, so confident in her ability to separate the winners from the losers based on appearance and behavior. But she'd been reading all the wrong things. And now everyone could see it. Rebecca didn't sleep that night. She lay in her expensive apartment with its view of the city skyline, staring at the ceiling, replaying 6 months of mistakes in excruciating detail. By Tuesday morning, the entire office had transformed. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but you could feel the shift in the air. Daniel's new office was on the executive floor, but he wasn't there most of the time. Instead, he moved through the building, sitting in on department meetings, eating lunch in the cafeteria with people from different teams, asking questions and actually listening to the answers. The people Rebecca had dismissed were suddenly everywhere. The receptionist, now office operations manager, was leading efficiency meetings. The warehouse worker was presenting logistics innovations to department heads. A quiet woman from IT who Rebecca had never bothered learning the name of was suddenly heading up a digital transformation initiative. And Rebecca? She still had her title, still had her office, but something fundamental had changed. The first real sign came during a client strategy meeting. Rebecca had prepared her usual presentation, the kind of polished performance she'd delivered hundreds of times. But when she started talking about leveraging high-value touchpoints and synergizing brand narratives, Daniel gently interrupted. Can we use simpler language? Our clients are smart people, but they hire us to solve problems, not to impress them with terminology. What are we actually proposing we do for them? Rebecca felt her face flush. She'd built her career on that kind of corporate language, on sounding sophisticated and strategic. Being asked to simplify felt like being told she wasn't as clever as she thought. She stumbled through a more straightforward explanation, and the meeting continued. But afterward, Daniel pulled her aside. I'm not trying to embarrass you, he said quietly, but I've noticed you tend to complicate things. Sometimes the smartest solution is the clearest one. He wasn't cruel about it. That somehow made it worse. Rebecca would have preferred anger, accusations, some justification for how she treated him. Instead, he was just honest, direct, and far more professional than she'd ever been with him. The changes kept coming. Daniel introduced a new policy where junior staff could submit ideas directly to leadership. Within 2 weeks, some of the best proposals came from people Rebecca had never considered worth listening to. A mailroom clerk suggested a filing system that saved hours of administrative work. An intern proposed a social media strategy that went viral and brought in 3 new clients. Rebecca watched her influence evaporate. The younger team members who used to seek her approval now went around her. The networking events she'd once dominated were restructured into collaborative workshops where everyone's voice supposedly mattered equally. The fancy client dinners were replaced with practical working lunches. Everything she'd valued, everything she'd built her success on, was being dismantled. Worse, she couldn't even complain about it. Because objectively, the company was thriving. Employee satisfaction surveys showed massive improvements. Productivity was up. Client retention had never been better. Daniel's changes were working. Rebecca just wasn't part of the success story anymore. 3 weeks after the big reveal, she found herself in the break room at the same time as Jasmine and 2 other colleagues. They were talking excitedly about a new mentorship program Daniel had announced. It's amazing, Jasmine said. He paired me with someone from the legal department to learn about contract negotiations. I've wanted to understand that side of the business for years, but nobody ever offered to teach me. Did you hear about Kevin from maintenance? Another colleague added. Daniel found out he's been taking engineering classes at night. Now the company's paying for it and he's going to transition into facilities design. He actually sees people, Jasmine said. Like really sees them? Not just their job titles or what they can do for him. Rebecca poured her coffee and left without joining the conversation. She couldn't. Because she knew exactly what they weren't saying out loud. She knew she'd never seen people that way. She'd only seen usefulness, status, and strategic value. The moment that broke her came a month after the revelation. Rebecca was working late, the way she always did, though now it felt less like dedication and more like hiding. She heard footsteps and looked up to see Daniel walking past her office. He paused at her door. "Still here?" "Just finishing some reports." Her voice came out defensive. Daniel nodded, then did something unexpected. He came in and sat down in the chair across from her desk. Not behind the desk where she sat, claiming the power position, but in front of it. "Eye level. Can I ask you something?" he said, Rebecca's heart hammered. This was it. He was going to fire her or demote her or finally call her out for how she treated him. "Why do you think I took that junior position?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know. To evaluate us, obviously. Your mother wanted you to see how the company really operated." "That's part of it," Daniel agreed. "But I could have done that lots of ways. I could have come in as a consultant or done anonymous surveys or reviewed reports from a distance. Why do you think I chose to actually work here? As a regular employee?" Rebecca didn't have an answer. "Because you can't understand people from above them," Daniel said. "You can't see who they really are when there's a power difference. When I was just another analyst, people treated me the way they'd treat anyone in that position. No performance, no pretending. Just normal human interaction." He leaned forward slightly. "And I learned something important. The people who were kind to me when they thought I was nobody, they were genuinely good people. The ones who ignored me or talked down to me, they showed me who they really were when they thought there were no consequences." Rebecca felt something crack inside her chest. She couldn't look at him. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," Daniel continued. "I'm telling you because I think you're smart enough to understand it. The way you treat people when you think they don't matter, that's who you actually are, not the performance you put on for executives and clients. The real you is how you act when you think nobody important is watching." He stood up, getting ready to leave. "You're good at your job, Rebecca. Your work is solid, but leadership isn't about being the most impressive person in the room. It's about making everyone around you better. And right now you don't do that." He walked to the door, then paused. "The question is whether you want to." Then he was gone, leaving Rebecca alone in her office with the fluorescent lights humming overhead and the city lights glittering outside her window. For the first time in her career, Rebecca had no idea what to do next. Everything she'd believed about success, about power, about what mattered in business had been turned upside down, and the worst part was knowing that Daniel was right. Rebecca didn't go into the office the next day. She called in sick for the first time in 3 years and spent the entire day sitting on her couch thinking. Daniel's words kept echoing in her head. "The way you treat people when you think they don't matter, that's who you actually are." She thought about the receptionist whose name she'd never bothered to learn until the woman was promoted. She thought about the interns she'd sent on coffee runs without ever asking about their career goals. She thought about every person she'd dismissed as unimportant, including Daniel himself. And she realized something that made her feel sick. She'd become exactly the kind of person she'd hated when she was starting out. When she was 23 and struggling, wearing discount store suits and bringing lunch from home, she'd sworn she'd never forget what it felt like to be overlooked. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten. Or maybe she'd just decided that now it was her turn to be on top, and everyone else could struggle the way she had. On Wednesday, she went back to work. But instead of going straight to her office, she did something she'd never done before. She stopped at the front desk. "Good morning," she said to the woman who'd worked there for 15 years. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've ever properly met. I'm Rebecca." The woman looked surprised, almost suspicious. "I know who you are. I'm Patricia. Patricia, I'm sorry it took me this long to ask." Rebecca felt awkward, exposed. "I heard about your new role. Congratulations, I should have said that sooner." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "Thank you. It wasn't much, but it was a start." Over the next few weeks, Rebecca began to change. Not all at once and not perfectly. Old habits kept creeping back in. But she caught herself now. When she was about to dismiss someone's idea in a meeting, she stopped and actually listened. When she was about to assign grunt work to a junior employee, she asked herself if there was something more meaningful they could do instead. She started having coffee with people she'd previously ignored. She learned that the IT specialist she'd never noticed had twin daughters and was building an app on the side, that the guy from accounting was a volunteer firefighter, that the quiet woman in legal was writing a novel. They were all people, full, complicated, interesting people, and she'd missed it completely because she'd been too busy looking at them as either useful or irrelevant. The hardest part was admitting she'd been wrong. Rebecca had built her entire identity around being right, being smart, being the one who knew better. Accepting that she'd failed at the most basic level of human decency felt like dismantling herself piece by piece. But she kept going. She started mentoring some of the younger staff, but differently than before. Instead of telling them how to dress or who to network with, she asked them what they wanted to learn and helped them find ways to grow. She connected people across departments, introduced them to opportunities, and gave credit where it was due instead of claiming it for herself. The response wasn't immediate. People were cautious around her, and she understood why. Trust had to be earned back slowly. 6 months after the big revelation, Rebecca requested a meeting with Daniel. She'd put it off for weeks, practicing what she'd say, then throwing it all out and starting over. Finally, she just sent the calendar invitation and forced herself to show up. Daniel's office was nothing like what she'd expected. No expensive art, no impressive view, just a simple desk with family photos and a window that looked out at the parking lot. He was in shirt sleeves, reading something on his laptop when she arrived. "Come in," he said, gesturing to the chair. The same relaxed, unpretentious manner he'd always had. Rebecca sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She'd prepared a whole speech, but now all the words felt inadequate. "I owe you an apology," she finally said. "I've tried to figure out the right way to say this for months, but there isn't a right way. I treated you terribly. I judged you based on your clothes and your lunch bag and the fact that you didn't play the political games I thought were important. I dismissed you as someone who didn't matter, and I gave you the worst assignments and excluded you from opportunities. And I'm ashamed of that." Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression neutral. "But it's not just you," Rebecca continued, her voice starting to shake. "You were right about what you said. The way I treated you is the way I've treated a lot of people over the years. I've spent my whole career thinking I was good at reading people, but I was only seeing surfaces. I was seeing what people could do for me, not who they actually were." She took a breath. "I know an apology doesn't fix it. I know I can't take back how I acted, but I want you to know that I'm trying to change. Not because I'm worried about my job, but because I don't want to be that person anymore." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. "I appreciate you saying that. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong, especially about something this fundamental." "I don't expect forgiveness," Rebecca said quickly. "I just wanted you to know." "Rebecca," Daniel said, and his voice was kinder than she deserved. "I didn't come here to punish people. I came here to build something better, and that has to include the possibility that people can change and grow." He pulled out a folder from his desk drawer. "I've been watching you these past few months. The way you've been working with the junior staff, the way you've been collaborating instead of competing, it hasn't gone unnoticed." Rebecca felt her throat tighten. "We're restructuring the mentorship program, and I'd like you to be part of the leadership team for it. Not because of your title or your years here, but because I think you understand something now that you didn't before. And that understanding, that willingness to change, that's what real leadership looks like." Rebecca couldn't speak for a moment. She'd expected polite distance at best, being fired at worst. She hadn't expected this. "Why?" she finally managed. "Why would you trust me after everything?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Because I don't believe people are just one thing. You made mistakes, but you owned them. You're doing the hard work of changing. That's more than most people are willing to do." He stood and extended his hand. "So what do you say? Want to help build something better?" Rebecca stood and shook his hand, feeling something shift inside her. Not absolution exactly. She'd still have to live with her past choices. Still have to earn back trust day by day, but possibility. A chance to be better than she'd been. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." Walking out of Daniel's office, Rebecca thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. The one who'd looked at a man in a worn suit and decided he didn't matter. The one who'd been so sure she knew everything about everyone. She'd been so wrong. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the point wasn't to always be right. Maybe the point was to keep learning, keep growing, keep trying to see people clearly. She passed Patricia at the front desk and waved. Patricia waved back, a genuine smile on her face. It was a small moment. But small moments were where real change happened. Not in grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but in the daily choice to see people as they actually were, to treat them with dignity regardless of their position or what they could offer you. Rebecca still had a long way to go. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. Not up some corporate ladder, but toward something more important, toward becoming someone she could actually respect.